Good morning. Today is Tuesday, April 20th, 2021. Hope everybody has a good day. My topic today is April 20th is not no ordinary day. Every day has significance to somebody, there's no question about that. And you look through history, every day has certain historic events that occurred on that day. I did not look up April 20th as such. I probably will later, and I'm sure there were events that took place on this day that are important historically. I want to talk about two very important years in my life in which April 20th stands out. The years were 1973 and 1993. 1973 was a big year for me. Uh, at the beginning of the year, I was living in Whitney, pastoring the Whitney Missionary Baptist Church, and about to begin my senior year at Baylor University. Well, there was some problems. The members of the church didn't like my methods of outreach and some of the things that I stood for, and I had stirred up a lot of controversy. On January 14th, I was voted out, which was, of course, not a positive experience at all. It's never a pleasant experience to lose any kind of job, but a job as a pastor, something you're called to do, makes it even more so. But by the grace of God, I survived. A number of years ago, I met my high school debate partner at a class reunion and gave him my card. I was pastor of Wayman Chapel AME Church at Ennis at the time, and he said that he recalled years back that I was a Baptist preacher and said they showed you the door, but apparently you found another door. And I have. And by the grace of God, I've had a very meaningful career as a pastor in the AME Church, but that would occur later. I managed to, in 1973, I received my BA from Baylor on May 18th and had a uh, very enjoyable summer, very difficult summer in some ways, a lot of hard work, but as a door-to-door Bible salesman in Pulaski, Virginia, but it was a very meaningful experience. And then that fall, I started graduate school at Baylor and working on my MA in Church State Studies. And I had a lot of experiences and related to an organization that's played a major role in my life, Freemasonry. I was raised as a Master Mason on March the 20th, 1973 at um, Waco Lodge number 92. And then on April the 20th, uh, 1973, I stood my proficiency exam in the work of the master's degree. So I cleared another hurdle. And then that fall, in September, I took the Scottish Rite and Shrine. So I made a lot of Masonic progress that year. And I found it all very meaningful. But back on track with April 20th. Uh, April 20th, 1973 was Good Friday, and so it was 2 days before Easter. I did not, beginning in 1979, I began fasting on Good Friday, but I hadn't yet observed that tradition, so that would be in the future. And in 1973, I went to Lodge that night. That was a Friday, Good Friday, and I stood my proficiency exam. But earlier that day, I had read in the Waco paper about an event that looked very interesting. It was, and I decided to attend it. It was called The Story of Esther, being presented at New Mount Carmel Center. And I had a friend who had made a trip to the Holy Land and brought me an Israeli shirt, and I wore it that night. Uh, the problem is I didn't find my way out there. I got lost. It's way out in the country. But I brought I retrieved from microfilm films that item from the Waco, it was then known as the Waco News Tribune, and about the event at Mount Carmel. And I brought a copy of that to John Young, who was then the editorial page editor for the Waco Tribune Herald. It was one time two papers, same authorship. I think it was editorship. It was in the morning it was the News Tribune, in the evening it was Times Herald, and they eventually made it one paper, once a day, Waco Waco Tribune Herald. That's what it is today. But I gave John a copy of this, and I didn't know until recent years he used that in an editorial on May 2nd, 1993. Readers of the April 20th, 1973 Waco Tribune Herald, Waco News Tribune were invited to a play, The Story of Esther. It was touted as a repeat performance put on by the Davidic Levitical Institute. To see the play, readers were instructed to take Luke 3:40 to Farm Market 2491 to a place near Elk, the new Mount Carmel Center. It's on Double E Ranch Road. The story was on page 1C. 20 years to the day, that same location would be on page 1 of newspapers around the world. On April 19th, 1993, what was once the new Mount Carmel Center, later jokingly dubbed Ranch Apocalypse by its inhabitants, disappeared in flames. The photo accompanying the 1973 News Tribune story features 6 Davidic players in period gowns. Once the rhinestone and cardboard crown, one wears a rhinestone and cardboard crown. Standing in the back wearing a robe and headdress is a man identified as Perry Jones. 20 years later, Perry Jones' body is one of those presumed to have been in the rubble and ashes of what he had made his home, and which he encouraged others to make their home. It is possible that Jones didn't survive to face the inferno. He was reported but not confirmed dead in the initial shootout with federal agents on February 28th. By the way, his body was eventually identified. And he was the father-in-law of Vernon Howell, also known as David Koresh. Reportedly, Jones was one of the few in the Mount Carmel community who had complete freedom to come and go. Maybe that's because Jones had a knack for bringing converts back to the compound. A perfume salesman, an insurance agent, a masseur, a sectarian journalist, Jones, 64 at the time, had worn many hats. He was well known around Waco. He was friendly, soft, anxious to talk religion, but not threateningly so. He had spent a lot of time in California recruiting members of the Branch Davidians. I met Perry Jones twice during the 1970s. He had a great deal of interest in church-state relations, so he would often come by the Church-State Research Center and at Baylor, and I was working on my MA in Church and State. On 2 occasions I was able to meet and talk with him, and I later learned from Dr. James Leo Garrett, my major professor, who passed away last year, and who's I had the honor of being a pallbearer at his funeral. And Dr. Garrett and I were lifelong friends. So he told me that Perry Jones would come by a lot of times when he was busy. He had other things to attend to and took a lot of time. On a couple of occasions, Dr. Garrett took field trips of students to Mount Carmel. And at that point in time, there was no guns. There was no hint of violence or polygamy. The focus was on moving to Israel and awaiting the end of time. Now, a lot of that changed, of course. And in 1981, Vernon Howell appeared, eventually became leader of the sect, and as they say, the rest is history. But John wrote about this, and he said that Jones had a knack for finding lonely people, people searching for meaning in their lives, people rejected by their churches. Jones' qualities seem to be shared by Howell's disciples, reserved, articulate, and friendly. Take those warm traits, though, and add a cold steer of automatic weapons. If the combination doesn't send a chill down your spine, you need to see a neurologist. There are so many people in the world who just want a friend, a set of ears trained their way. Some say that all Vernon Howell and Perry Jones did was offer people friendship and something to believe. But if that were the case, we wouldn't have a tragedy on our hands. Howell wanted something in return, namely submission. One of Jones' daughters who left the cult told Cox News Service that her parents changed dramatically. She blamed Howell. Two people who rejected weapons, sex outside of marriage, and what she called self-inflicted apocalypse appeared to change their minds. I just wouldn't believe they were ready to die for him. It shows how much control he had over them. And Dr. Garrett recalled that when he knew Perry Jones, he was always very rational, and you could discuss religion, politics, and a lot of other things with him. And he thought that at some point he would have had the sense to get out of there, but apparently he didn't. Meanwhile, Jones' widow, who moved away from the compound, accepts Perry's fate and those of 3 children, at least 4 grandchildren, all lost in the shootout and fire. She believes Howell to be Christ in another form. Mary, she and Perry probably didn't have much of a marriage the last several years, and she was not at the compound when all this happened, and so she survived it. I've been told that she has since passed away. I saw her a few times after that at the Seventh-day Adventist Church and also at the Jewish synagogue. The Branch Davidians they stress the Old Testament a great deal, and throughout their history they've had a great deal of affinity for the Jews. But looking back, the photograph from 20 years ago, John writes, I see the faces, what I consider to be good people. Perry Jones and I could have been friends. The caveat, in exchange for his friendship, he would have never gotten my freedom to choose or my children's. There are so many lonely people searching for something to believe in. One wonders how many others have submitted to mind control to make sense of the world in which they live. One also wonders if any who read the old newspaper article went to see the story of Esther stayed for the next 20 years. Well, as I said earlier, I got lost, didn't make it out there. I guess I didn't. No, I wouldn't have stayed 20 years, I can assure you that. What happened that night, I ended up going back to Waco. That was April 21st, 1973. Went to a place called Magic Music, where I met Mike Contreras Jr., who became my roommate the next year at Baylor. Mike was fixing to graduate from La Vega High School, and we roomed together. He was a freshman, I was a graduate student. And our friendship lasted until Mike's death in 2016. On April the 20th, 1993, I attended a service of prayer and lament at the Central Presbyterian Church in Waco. And it was attended by a lot of important people, including Governor Ann Richards. And it was truly a tragedy when 76 people lost their lives in the fire that destroyed the Branch Davidian compound. I was living in Waco through all that ordeal. Mount Carmel's about 10 or 15 miles out in the country, so during the time they're saying wacko, and we ain't coming out. But it was truly a tragedy. But in '93, in '73 I was finishing my BA at Baylor. In '93 I was working on my PhD. I had gotten through my prelims. No, not yet. I'm sorry. I got through with my coursework in December of '92, and I was studying. I spent most of the year studying for prelims, which I passed in September of '93, and then began working on my dissertation. I finished it and I graduated in May of '95. So it was quite a journey. But the April 20th, 1973, and April 20th, 1993 were very memorable days. And I hope April 20th, 2021 is a good day for all of you. That's all.